Hello, and welcome to the kickoff event of the workshop Tanz Digital, Technologies, Methods, Artistic Strategies, here live from Bethanien, from Berlin-Kreuzberg. My name is Julia Decker, and on behalf of the Dachverband Tanz Deutschland, German Dance Association, we are pleased to offer you this 3 days workshop in cooperation with the International Theater Institute as part of the funding program Tanz Digital. With Tanz Digital, we want to support dance artists, dance ensembles, dance institutions in the media presentation of artistic productions. The goals of the project are the development of innovative choreographic, artistic formats and the testing of new recording and production formats. For example, working with body cams, 3D recording techniques, VR and AR applications, streaming and video on demand, motion capturing, and so on. At the moment, we support about 50 dance projects all over Germany, whether theaters, culture institutions, independent companies, or solo artists. Within the framework of Tanz Digital, it is our concern to create a network for dance in the digital space, and also to offer dancers an opportunity to exchange ideas in this field. That is why we are planning further events on the topic of digital dance this year. Our efforts are supported by the Federal Ministry of Culture and Media. We are looking forward to 3 exciting days, and now hand over to Christine Henniger from the International Theater Institute. Thank you.
Hello. Hello also from my part. My name is Christine Henniger. I'm the lead of the Media Library for Dance and Theatre at the International Theatre Institute, and I hope, of course, that today we will also see how the archive gets involved into the future of digitality in dance. But first of all, I want to say hello to all of you here with us in the room, in the Studio 1 of Kunstquartier Bethanien in the wonderful Berlin-Kreuzberg. I'm happy to welcome you to this workshop, as Julia already said, to this workshop of Tanz Digital, dealing with the idea of how dance and digitality can come together and can work together. We have an amazing group of participants today here with us who, through these next 3 days, will work with us together, work with the workshop leads together in several rooms and spaces of this building, and will always come together in this room, exchanging on the idea of what dance and digitality can be out of the practice. So the whole idea is to bring the practice into the discussion here in these rooms. We further have, as I already said, an evenly amazing group of workshop contributors, workshop leads, whom I will introduce later on in this panel. But first of all, I want to start to welcome our keynote speaker, Marina Dessau. Marina is a performance and theater artist working with the multimedia label Internil since 2005. Marina has been studying propaganda, post-political infotainment, and strongly oscillating online behavior while exploring their physical translations for theater contexts. Recently, she has been focusing on high technology for the performing body, specifically on face tracking and haptic feedback. Today, she will be our keynote speaker, and I'm happy to have her here. The floor is yours, Marina.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you. So, hello. This is me, Marina. I was named after an Italian love song. You don't know me yet. I also don't know much about you. All we know is that there's a space in between us. which is yet to be filled. During the upcoming half hour or so, I will speak about this space and some of the things which I discovered when working with digital tools, exploring it. The space in between us is an interesting one. It's quite fragile too. It's the place where everything comes to be. The sympathies, the discomfort. Sometimes there's love or oxytocin. At times there's conflict. There can be war. The space has its own topography, its own shape. We can feel it. It's mostly invisible. We act upon it. We have subjective perspectives on it. The space is therefore fractured. Some of it you fill with your imagination, some of it I fill with mine, some of it we share. Actually, in between all of you, there are all these little spaces which will change shape and topography throughout the upcoming 3 days, which you will be spending in those workshops together. There's also this larger space that we all share, a former chapel. Beyond the walls of this chapel, there are streets, there are houses, there's a whole city, there's a country with its borders, there are other countries with their borders, and not that far from us, right now, in this very moment, the spaces between the people, quite a lot of them, are distorted, they're shattered, because once again, our globally shared, ever-shifting space of geopolitics, with its ever-shifting interests, has been shattered. But for now, let's come back to this chapel, full of artists, a chapel full of artists. Artists have been exploring all kinds of spaces in time and relations for quite a while now. One could say that we came a pretty far way from digging up pigments and blowing them through little hollow bird bones against a cave wall. We now use virtual walls made of flowing images and streaming digits, which can turn into endless horizon within a blink of a gesture. Lenses inside headsets bend the light so that we can globally and trick our retinas and our bodies to stretch our senses and aesthetics, to challenge the boundaries of perceptions, and hopefully preconceptions. As the upcoming 3-day workshop is going to be called Tanz Digital, Digital Dance, I'll skip the bird bones and the pigments and the cave walls, and I'll go to the digital realm. So what's special about digital is that we can take an extract from reality, record it, and divide it up into as many fractions as a program allows us to. We can choose how many numbers we skip, how we scramble them up, how we boost them, what kind of attributes we assign to them. We can boost, repeat them, loop them in time to eventually re-represent that extract of reality. This new variant now makes visible or audible or tangible how we relate to that whatever we decided to scrutinize. The principle as such is nothing revolutionary, and I could just as well be talking about bird bones and cave walls. I'll go back to the digits though, and I'd love to explore AR-assisted remote surgery, or the maybe future of cryptocurrency, or hackable drones and critical infrastructure. But I'll go directly to the field of my artistic curiosity over the last years. What in my eyes is remarkable about the digital is that only digital provides for deep fakes and fake news of such perfection and in such quantity that our sense of what to believe and who to trust can get discombobulated. Only with the digital information delivery service of the World Wide Web can the info and image war rage at its current breathtaking frequency. From around 2014 to 18, together with the artist collective I'm part of, we examined some of these digital phenomena around a project which I'm going to come back to in a moment. During this time, I made an unexpected discovery at the intersection of digital and body-based performance art, which I would like to share with you. But before I do that, let me tell you what triggered all of this. Something that happened which left such a deep impression that I began asking myself how we could possibly digitize this space in between us, this place where everything comes to be. To maybe understand it better, to naively put, prevent all this constant conflict. In 2014, I was sitting in a cafe in Berlin by myself, eating cake, drinking coffee. At the neighboring table, there was a debate about the history of Crimea and international law, because Crimea had just been invaded by masked soldiers in green uniforms, which were missing their identification badges. It seemed to be a friendly discussion. People seemed to be quite educated on the subject, and I was just about to make a funny comment about Potemkin's facade when the conversation took a turn. One of the participants expressed her sympathy for the masked soldiers. She said that deploying them was the right thing to do. And then she literally pulled out her phone and started quoting her newsfeed. She was pretty soon interrupted. Someone said, "Those little green men had no business there whatsoever," and someone else pulled out their phone and started quoting their newsfeed, and there was a whole lot of scrolling going on, and it just, accusations were raised, and degradations followed, nasty humiliations. It got loud, it got really loud, it got so loud that the whole cafe was just staring at the table. And then when you think that it couldn't get any louder, it just suddenly, this whole screaming just crashed into a cold silence. The silence was interrupted by this really thin, long slurp. It was an elderly lady at the other end of the room who didn't seem to have heard a thing. She was smiling, looking out the window. Birds were chirping. Finally, the man who had first interrupted the newsfeed lady slowly got up from his chair and said, "You'll see. They'll come and eat you alive." He finished his drink, and with a precise shot of directed anger, he threw his glass against the wall and left the cafe and walked into the streets of Berlin. Now, that was 8 years ago. And everything I described happened exactly as I said, and a chair had fallen and a cup was spilled. I only invented the thrown glass to add some drama to the story. Today, we know about the reality of a lot of broken glass. Back then, in 2014, those proxy wars at coffee tables were only beginning. And over time, as you know, there were more and more opportunities to observe just how quickly barriers are raised when people disagree on what they claim to be facts or believe to be facts. I kept wondering what it was exactly that happens inside and in between bodies when people turn into clashing news feeds. the experience at the cafe, and many other events, and many people's ideas thereafter culminated in a series of projects called Gog and Magog, a disinformation campaign. The series of pieces was developed over the course of 4 years by the performance label I'm part of, as well as other artists. Now, there's a lot to say about this project and about the amazing artists that we were lucky to work with, but for here and now, though, I'll keep it to how, while working on the project, I discovered a detour through the barriers via the body. In preparation for this detour, let me invite you to a thought experiment. Let's zoom back into our chapel. Let's go back to the beginning. Try and remember my first words. What if instead I had said, "Hello, this is me, Marina. I was named after a Russian poet. You don't know me yet. I don't know much about you. All we know is that there's a space in between us, which is yet to be filled." Now, it probably would have been a different one than when I told you that I was named after an Italian love song. As a performer, I can be merely a projection surface, mirroring back to you a partition of this space which you fill with your imagination. It is this ancient stage performance principle we made use of when working on the production I just mentioned. So this is what we did, and this is how I ended up exploring the space in between politically charged bodies. The artist collective I work with, internil, has been deep diving the World Wide Web for many, many years now, way too long. It's our frame of reference, it's our object of examination, and it's also our source of material. We don't take its data too seriously, but we do study it carefully as the battleground for today's information wars. By conscious choice, our research is algorithm directed. That means we leave the cookie boxes checked and down the rabbit holes we go for weeks. To give you just a little bit of context on the mentioned project, for the series of productions, we researched the online info battles of the around then current conflict zones between 2014 and 17, Ukraine, Syria, Israel, as well as future World War III online scenarios about Europe falling apart in the end times. The end times were no coincidence because we interwove every conflict zone station with the apocalyptic motive of Gog and Magog. Now, it's a motive that appears in slightly different versions in all three scriptures, Torah, Quran, and the Bible, and it refers to a prophecy about the last battle at the end of days. Online, the motive is used by political content creators of all kinds and all backgrounds to basically support their fear messages. Their favorite thing is to announce the Armageddon and point at others who are at fault about something, and at least the apocalypse. From this online research, we generated the material and the scenes for our pieces. Now, it all sounds pretty dark, but we did try to keep it light, or as light as possible. All artists in the project used different approaches and angles. My objective was to learn about the nature of confrontational bodies. I had observed them, how I had observed them at the cafe, or how I would come across them online. To study them, I used the well-known performance method of reenactment. A performer physically copies people from researched material. Now, in the case of a video, it means I put on earphones, turn on the video, and when a person's voice flows right into my ears, I simultaneously, with a second of delay, repeat after that voice. I whisper, I scream, and I also simultaneously copy the movements of the person from the video, precisely. When we step inside another body and do exactly as the pixels direct us, it means that the body is used as an interface and a muscle memory device for functional reenactment. That is the process during which a spectator unconsciously imitates how a person is speaking or moving while internally doing the same thing, speaking or moving. It's nothing new. Otherwise, Hamlet wouldn't have engaged the group of actors so that he could watch the maybe murderer's reaction to the reenactment of his father's death. Now, what's different today in the digital time, that we have a 24/7 reality feed. We have access to crowdsourced information with uploads of eyewitnesses, documented experiences of real people during a conflict or a war. The stage material doesn't just come from an author's or a performer's imagination or memory, but from real or faked, or more and more so, deep-faked info-war imagery and sound. When I would choose a particular video to work with, I would first classify the context, study the aesthetics, look for patterns in people's body language. I would look for contradictions between what people say on the content level and their gestures, facial expressions, and body poses. Because it's those contradictions that give away internal processes which sometimes aren't even, the people aren't even aware of themselves. For some reenactments, we would use a motion tracking suit to visualize the gap between the performer and the original material. The gamut of material I worked with ranged from serious politicians to indeed giggly preachers to eyewitnesses in rage or distraught. Not every piece I chose to work with was disturbing, but I'll walk you through one extreme example because it clarifies best the unexpected experience which made me discover the detour through the barrier via the body. I came across a video of a woman. She was standing behind a lectern, like me right now. And she was giving a very racist speech at some sort of public event. In a calm and most laid-back way, she was explaining to an off-screen audience of young girls, probably young girls, why young girls should beware of men of a certain ethnicity. When physically copying the woman during the rehearsal phase from a screen, I would repeat her movements and speech with precision. This kept me busy at first, and there was no mental space to evaluate what I was saying. I basically hacked myself into this reaction chain of perceive, evaluate, react. And I landed, I surfaced right in that moment before the evaluation, in this very brief and fragile phase of wonder. After that brief phase of wonder, after my body had adopted hers without judgment, I began to actually hear what I was saying. Her words were coming out of my mouth. To my brain, I was saying the most outrageous things. I then noticed how speaking turned into an effort. My muscles resisted And I had to force myself to find ways to trick the mind into physically not rejecting her. That is actually me, her, you know? There was this inner battle between her and my arguments at a really, really high frequency. I was basically sitting in an imaginary coffee table inside of me, fighting with myself, that is, with her. Even stranger it was when the discovery of the familiar began to kick in, the overlay. You can probably see it here right now in my expression. It's an expression for moral disgust. And I was confused. The woman who had really seemed outrageous to me before, she seemed to slowly dock onto my emotional receptors, as if I had switched places with her at the coffee table and we were slowly moving into an overlay, not on the argumentative, not on the rational level, but on the body level. Our senses of self and belonging overlapped for a moment. I felt her necessity for a sense of structure, while I at the same time perceived my longing for fluidity at the same time. I found myself in a physical agreement with her on stage with something that I would otherwise never sync with in life and still wouldn't. And I felt inexplicably close to that woman. So I asked myself, where did that feeling of familiarity could possibly stem from? Wasn't I, after all, the most tolerant, peace-loving creature I've ever met? I believe it's quite simple. I was experiencing the exchangeability of the emotional identification layers of our human bodies. After all, we do use the same hardware, and we do draw from the same palette of emotions. Probably the woman and I are simply providing differing content to our emotional motherboards. Now, if that is so, then I must also have some corresponding intolerance program just running somewhere in the back, refreshing without me noticing. I must have simply been drawing my connection with her from my own othering. That is me othering her, the otherer. The thought itself might not seem like a moon landing, and I surely won't stop othering any otherer. But the experience was an eye and a sense opener. When we presented this woman through me in front of an audience, we would come out of a scene during which we had just performed a really happy children's song, and the audience was still really, really cheerful and happy, and me from behind an illuminated lectern, I began to speak in a really soft voice, and I drew the focus of the audience. All faces turned towards me, still cheerful. We had a projection of the woman behind me so that the audience could see the reference to the original material. Clearly, she and I looked very different, our body shapes differed. She was wearing a black dress and had a red hairband. I was completely dressed in white and my hair was smothered with gel to the back. I was wearing these giant earphones and her words were coming into my ears, and I was basically repeating her words, word by word, tone by tone, and carried her images of her inner enemies into the relaxed faces of the audience, who in that moment took on the role of an audience at some public event. The expressions, the faces slowly began to realize, catch up with what I was saying to them. Expressions dropped, and for a moment it became very, very uncomfortable in the theater space. The obvious question is, why? Like, what's the point? Why do that to oneself or expose an audience to it? This is an important question. I'll answer it. From what people have described to us over the years and what we have experienced ourselves, it is in this space of friction in between the original material, the performer as a physical prolongation of that material into the space, and the audience, that the audience may find itself confronted with their own inner blind spots and contradictions. While in life our minds are usually busy, internally or out loud, contradicting the content of what is being said, in a performance context, there is suddenly room for becoming aware of one's own body reactions, of the triggers, of the associations, of emotional reactions, of objections or overlays, of empathy or apathy, the dread of speaking up, or also the social pressure. People have also recounted to us that for a brief moment, their sense of self, as well as their perception of a given situation, became unstable, allowing them to see things from a different angle. Now, none of what I've described is supposed to advertise blind empathy or any kind of acceptance for intolerance or hostility. On the contrary, I think this approach can be a game-changing puzzle piece in helping to understand how even the most outrageous opinion might seem completely rational to someone else. Understand, not accept. And understanding that, this different outlook can help discuss, contradict, or even act in a way that can actually reach through the barrier to another person. When we work with radical, documentary material, we have the responsibility to not simply reproduce intolerance when we rearrange the digits. And that's the challenge. How far do we deviate from the documentary, from the documents when wanting to make visible the documentary character of a material before they become some unrelated artistic expression, while at the same time providing for an artistic framing so that the audience can fall back onto the safe ground when confronted with emotionally triggering material. It's a thin line, and for every artistic decision, the options need to be reevaluated, especially when the material is coming from an ongoing conflict. This is something we definitely learned throughout the course of our productions. Let me close the loop and return to my main quest. Often when I was wearing the motion tracking suit and we were visually comparing a recorded person's movement and my movement data, I was thinking, if we were able to digitize all these gaps and overlays in between us even further, we could eventually measure the spaces in between us. We could maybe develop something corresponding to like a color wheel is to the mysteries of light, a behavior wheel that corresponds to the mysteries of our human behaviors. It could help us analyze and understand even better, and we could prevent recurring tragedies from happening, right? Unfortunately, I have to question my quest for just another digital technology. First of all, it would take us a lot of motion tracking suits, and that wouldn't be too sustainable. And we'd have to convince a lot of people reenacting, reenactors, and who's that crazy, right? And secondly, there's nothing new under the sun, I heard someone cheerful say the other day. Because that's exactly what so many researchers and companies are doing right now. To try and figure out who we are and how to predict our human behavior. And they're chewing our data all day long. And we all are aware of the controversies around it. So I'm not so sure about my fantasy to digitize the space in between us after all. Anything we invent is usually a promise and a potential crash at the same time. It's been this way ever since pigments and bird bones and cave walls. But that's a whole different keynote, and I'm only going to point out that we urgently need a public discussion about the ethics and regulations around all sorts of digital technology, be it face recognition, now officially used in hot conflicts, how I read the other day, be it the chaos which is happening in cyberspace, be it dreams of metaverses. This needs to be discussed in public a lot. To make sense, we need to use our senses. There's value in experiencing something with the whole physicality of our given body, not only imagining it with the mind. Through physically approximating oneself to the experience of a different subjectivity, the gap between the self and another becomes tangible. We don't see how others see until we really flip the angle. And because we can't go in reenactment gear all day, or not yet, the question remains, what can be taken from the stage experience I described earlier when our beliefs or news feeds are about to clash again amidst the daily fog of conflict? We can walk in someone else's shoes with our minds, kind of like in an analog, self-immersing thought experiment. While listening to what someone is saying, one can simultaneously really look and give oneself to observing, experiencing, and melting with how someone is speaking and moving. No worries, there will still be enough room for internal perception and to sift through all the arguments getting ready for a contradiction. Our minds are fast and vast. We might find a different understanding. We might gain new and additional information, which we otherwise would have not had any access to. We just might end up answering or listening differently when fighting at the coffee table. Or we might actually be able to absorb the meaning of a warning and learn to listen when a chair falls and a cup is spilled and an imaginary glass is thrown against the wall. For me, technology is merely a means to distance oneself, to then again get really close to an experience we otherwise would not have had, to see from a new viewpoint, from a new point of sense, putting the data points back together for a shift of perception, to reimagine. Naturally, we're kind of forced to stay inside our own hardware, reinterpreting the eyes of another with our own thoughts and feelings. One cannot leave the barrier which is given with the existing body, but the interrelational facades between people may become more permeable. Then again, there's no need to empathize at all costs. There are limits. And if a barrier won't fully come down, we can at least keep the curtain translucent so that we know what we're up against. That way, the specter on the other side of the curtain can be seen and will be seen for what it is, and cannot spiral into hidden reflections of one's own worst fears. I wish you great and surprising learning experiences and discoveries throughout the upcoming 3 workshop days at the intersection of digital and body-based performance art. And I'll finish by handing over to your workshop leads, which will be shedding light in a moment, I believe, which will be shedding light on some of the more high-tech versions of immersion. And actually, I can't wait to hear about the outcomes of the workshops in 3 days from now. By the way, I was named after an Italian love song. I was named after a Russian poet. I was named after my grandmother. Thank you.
Welcome back here still in the Studio 1 of Kunstquartier Bethanien. I'm happy to be here with all of the workshop leads sitting beside me. And what we just got now from Marina was, as I said to the audience in here, was a very hard-taking keynote. Actually, I had to cry a bit. I'm sorry to tell you, but I will come to you later. I think we're starting with the panel, and then we're going into the discussion with you, if you're okay with that. Thank you. Also for me to come down. And I start with a quote by someone else, also to get some flowing back to the dance, where we want to start today, dance and technology. Digital media have radically reformatted dance for an era of information globalization, accelerating and expanding the ways that bodily motion proliferates as it is uploaded, downloaded, and shared as data. In thus remediating and reformatting dance, digital media throw open, magnify, and broadly disseminate dancing's already powerful physical articulation of how we act in common. This is a quote by Harmony Bench out of her newest publication, Perpetual Motion, which I recommend to everyone here in the room, I wanted to start with how dance actually can influence into the digital, not only how the digital can influence into the dance, because I think this is something where we are going on during the next 1 hour, finding both directions in the discussion here. I'm happy to have with me my co-panelists. First of all, I would like to introduce Kirsten Seligmüller. She is a dancer and dance educator who founded the dance production spaces Doc 11 and Eden, together with others, here in Berlin. In 2020, during the peak of the pandemic, she founded actually Doc Digital, to work, amongst others, with motion capture in dance. We will hear a lot of her later on. To left of me, also, Einaf Katan-Schmidt, the head of the School of Dance at Kibbutzim College for Education, Technology and Arts in Tel Aviv, Israel. She holds also a postdoctoral fellowship at the Excellence Cluster Image, Knowledge, Gestaltung at Humboldt University of Berlin. Also with us here is Britta Bischoff. She is the project lead of the Digital Media Division at Theater Koblenz. Her work includes the conception of live streams, VR projects at Theater Koblenz, also in cooperation with the University of Koblenz. On the right of my side, there's Björn Lengers. Hello to you. He is a programmer, data analyst, and theater artist. Together with Marcel Kanapke, who can't be with us today, they formed the collective Cyberräuber, the theater of virtual reality. That's your second part of the name. And last but not least, of course, Pablo San Salvador. Hello also to you. He's a creator, dance artist, choreographer, movement designer, lots of it. And currently he works as the artistic director of Tanz Labor Ulm, in Ulm, of course, a platform that aims to facilitate and promote artistic creation in the field of dance. Hello also to you. First of all, I want to thank Marina for this keynote. Just thanking you, not asking you. No. We invited her also to be with us now here in the talk. Later on, we also want to talk with her about the keynote and what she presented to us and the influence she mentioned of disinformation also on the arts form and on the other hand of the arts into this disinformation area, field, world, let's say it like that. The idea of this panel is to give a glimpse onto the insight of the workshops to come, not only for the participants present here, hello to all of you, but also to our audience in the outer world. Welcome to all of you on the internet, being with us here, we're happy to have you. We're trying to do the dramaturgy in both directions. We have a camera here, I'm winking to you, hello. And we have the audience here, and you know it's always nice to have everyone in here. And now we're already in there. It's the digital with the reality. We're merging everything, you know this. And I'm moving into every direction, looking everywhere. And this will also be part of our discussion in the next minutes, I guess. We will then go into a deeper discussion, opening the panel to everyone here in the room, also giving you the opportunity to ask the workshop leads about their work and what they are doing, and also to present your ideas on what you heard later on. I'd like to start with Björn. Hello again. Your production, Cyber Ballet, together with the main dancer, Enad Roni Maciel, who unfortunately also can't be with us because he's in Brazil at the moment, is only one in a lot of productions that you, together with Marcel, as Cyberräuber produced. I would like to hear more about why you got involved with dance. I think this is something new in Cyber Ballet, I'd say, at least as far as I know about your former productions. And yeah, we'd like to hand over the microphone to you. It's true. And I will do that. No, of course. How you got interested in working with dance in the digital in the first place, and maybe just a bit talking about what Cyberräuber did before that, maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, it's indeed our first venture into dance, into movement, Cyber Ballet. We are 2016, Marcel and me, we met at a conference about VR, well, VR film basically, so 360 degrees movies, and we were both at the same time, what can I say, we were unhappy with the way the medium virtual reality was presented at this conference. So only from a filmmaker's point of view. And for us, virtual reality always was and is still a medium of, well, virtual reality is maybe not a good term, I think. We like to talk of virtual space because that's basically what it is for us. It is a space to be in, even if it is only partially physical. And the whole reality discussion is for some other people, I guess, who are more wise and philosophical based than we are. So the question of dance, well, we are curious. We started with theater and theater in all different forms. Never actually really came across the whole idea of movement, and were asked, basically we were asked by a theater to do this, right? So we wanted to do a co-production with the Badische Staatstheater in Karlsruhe, and due to kind of a mix-up of the organization in that theater, suddenly they asked us if we wanted to do something with the ballet. And as we are curious, we were happy to try this out and to find our own approach to this. And this is something that you will, at least when you will be taking part in the workshop, you will see. We had a couple of months before that production, we ended another project about artificial intelligence and about machine learning algorithms, and got really deep into that field. And so in a way we combined our both vectors of research in a way. So we were looking into movement as total newbies in a way, so people who do not really know about this. Well, we move, obviously, we have bodies, but that's about all our expertise that we had. And then the question about machine learning, and so we tried to combine these two in a way of what would it be for an artificial intelligence to understand the human, human nature, right? So machine learning, artificial intelligence, it all focuses on neural networks, so on a kind of a, how does the brain work? But we know that to be human, obviously, is not only to be a brain somewhere, so the brain in the jar thing, but everything, you know, our stomachs, our entails, everything is very important for us to be. So, and this was then the question. So does it help an artificial intelligence to understand how humans are if it understands how movement works? So that's it.
That's really, okay, some partner here too. Right, we are not just brains in a jar, that's true. But as you said, you're coming from the, so it was the first time that you really started thinking out of the movement coming into virtual reality. Do you think it also changed your way of thinking about how to work with the digital technologies or with the cyberspace, as you said beforehand? I don't know. I mean, you said it was a very pragmatic decision having the ballet because of the mix-up, but maybe there were some ways. As you said, it's the third production that you're now doing.
Yeah, well, in a way, it's difficult because it's basically a little bit the way how we work anyway. So it's there is no master plan. There's no big list of things that we want to tick off but basically coming from one project or from a couple of projects, getting into a new one, we try to somehow combine what we've learned in the ones before and then to go further and try this out. Movement, of course, was always part of what we were doing in virtual reality, right? So our first piece, why we are called Cyberräuber, was when we were doing a couple of scenes of Schiller's Die Räuber in virtual reality, and that already was a piece where we used volumetric recordings of actors, and set our spectators, our audience, in a one-on-one encounter with the actors, right? So you could already move around in space in order to experience these little scenes. So that was one of the earliest things that we realized, that it is most important that by setting the spectators into a situation where they can move around and find their own perspectives on the situation, on the scene, on the whole drama, that this is a new aspect of, you know, of perceiving this theater. And so movement was always very important. Right? But now, of course, the question of how to, can I say convert? That's not right. But how to record and convert something which is difficult to record, and to bring it into this virtual space, in order to be perceived again as art, as movement art. And that was interesting for us, of course, because that was more difficult in a way than text-based or music-based theater. You know, so we are so used to video, and we are so used to audio recordings. This is something that we do for almost 100 years and longer. But to have something where you can move around in a three-dimensional space and then perceive something that is actually also, you know, has been recorded three-dimensionally, and then you can perceive it again, and maybe in the next step also interact with it. Yeah, to put your own body into this context of this situation. This is something that is kind of new and difficult. And and this is what makes it so interesting, I guess. And of course, that means it is far from over, this whole research, and so not only for us, but for everybody, I guess. So this is a very, very interesting field.
I hope that's what we're getting to hear also from the other workshop leads following now. It's the space, it's something new, it's something difficult. I think that is something that's also relating to how you in Tanzlabor Ulm came to the idea of Tanz mit dem Tiger, Dance with the Tiger, when starting in 2020 to develop this production. Maybe Pablo, you can tell us a bit about how and why you started to develop this idea and how you come to work in this, let's say, area of distance and very tight dancing, both at the same time, working in the real world as well as in the virtual world. Yes, I would like to give the mic to you, or the virtual mic in this case.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was kind of in the middle of the pandemic, and usually I love working with international people, and we kind of, there was a metaphor that was used to describe of how Germany would deal with the pandemic. Dr. Torsten, he described it as dancing with the tiger. And I was told that, and I love the sentence, and in that sense, the idea was to how can we literally dance with the tiger, and as a choreographer or dance maker, I just realized we wanted to, how can we do that digitally? So what we put together is we did an open call for distant digital dance makers. So we put an open call out there for anyone who has motion capture suits that would like to make content for us. And yeah, we put that together, and we got about 50 applications, and we slowly nailed it down to like 3 people, and with that, we found dance makers in Brazil, the USA, and Hong Kong, and we connected them, and we wanted to bring them to Germany through an AR performance. And my mind was stretched when I connected with Widerstand and Sona and Alpai, who was a code artist, and Guido Stuck, who also created the avatars, to create their work in the space next to two live dancers, so that hybrid feeling between the two. That's how and it happened because of the pandemic, pretty much. And the funding also, of course.
Yes, that's always. I'm actually curious about that fact you just mentioned. Alpai was also here today with us. How did that come? I mean, it was your first virtual production, as far as I understood, in Tanzlabor Ulm. How you just approached him and told him, well, yeah, let's do something virtual because we have a pandemic, or how did you do that?
To be very honest, I didn't know what the difference was between AR and VR at that stage. I was very, very naive. I had no idea. And then I slowly talked to them, and I had an idea, and they said, yeah, it's possible, we can try that. We didn't know how a motion capture suit worked either, and we didn't. So we had, like, the learning curve was the biggest learning curve I've had. And so, yeah, it was just creative people coming together, problem solving, and pulling our hair out until we figure it out. And that was the beautiful thing, is that we shared it on a global scale as well. So we'd have Zoom calls all together and say, we're putting that together, or this didn't work, or can you do it like that? And that international aspect was kind of like water on a desert for everyone that was kind of in a vacuum of not being able to create or share work. So that was, yeah, the most beautiful part for me in that sense.
Yeah, coming together and working as artists and just finding ways probably was something that many of the artists thrived during the first months of the pandemic, not knowing what to do during this part. And it's still, you already said you had this idea of dance with the tiger, and having this realizing really to go to that, what does it mean to dance with a tiger. Maybe you can go into that a bit more, telling a bit more about how you creatively came to this, how you approached to this also with the dancers in the distance, and how you got into the idea of really moving together with the tiger on the stage, with the distance and everything. Yes.
Yeah, so it was kind of like a metaphor, but because a tiger is such an attractive animal, we kind of put it in the middle of a room as an anchor for the AR, and and because that was, funding has to be done by a certain time. You have to finish it and deliver it. It was always tight. And we didn't know quite how it worked, to be honest. But we kind of gave tasks to all the distant digital dance makers, saying, okay, imagine you're running on the spot, or you're moving, or you're passively waiting before going on stage. And so I gave them a few choreographic tasks, and they'd made that content, and then they sent it over to Guido. Guido turns to Avatar, and then Guido sent it to Alpai. Alpai put it into the space. We saw it on the iPads, and then I said, dancers, we're going to choreograph with them. And so we were there with the iPad saying, okay, there's one dancer moving here, and we have to relate to them at the same time. So there's this parallel world, and of course, we had, there's choreography for the live dancers, there's choreography for the distant digital dance makers, the AR, and then we tried to slowly merge them together, and that was the more sensitive moment where the audience, that obviously the dancer doesn't see them, only the audience sees them through the tablet or the device, and that was the kind of, that was the objective, to get them in the space dancing at the same time, despite them being not there, and we just learned that, and that was great for the people overseas, and a challenge for the dancers themselves, because we showed them that they're dancing with them, even though they're not. But we kind of said, okay, they're here, and we're trying to put a light there and make sure it fits with the sound and the choreography, and so all the pieces came together. And what was one particularly, I had to delegate a lot of, or create a lot of trust with Alpai, because he became the choreographer, because he'd put the avatars where they were, how big they were, when they moved, when they stopped moving, and so that he became the master choreographer in that sense. So that was just extra fun. Just the beauty was putting a big puzzle together, and that everyone contributed their skills and expertise, and that's the beautiful thing about dance choreography and the digital aspect of just increasing the complexity or the possibilities.
Would you say that choreographing also changed a bit during this process in working in a digital? As you said, Alpay became some kind of the head choreographer, not being a choreographer beforehand, that you also find other ways of cooperating within the field of creative processes. I don't know, it feels like that when you said that.
Yeah, I wish there was more time or more space to have worked with the distant digital dance makers. So I gave them some tasks and I gave them quite a lot of freedom, but there wasn't, I didn't give them, we say, okay, make 4/8 of choreography or something like that. And that was a kind of, a space that could be more refined or honed down so that when the two worlds come together, they kind of fit more like a glove. And at this first stage, we just kind of gave the freedom and then we kind of adapted to each other. We gave them like a soundscape so the distant digital dancers knew what sound would be during their content or while they're dancing the space. But of course, I had to be much more flexible, but also much more detailed because it's all just numbers, you know, like you have to time code it on the right place, and there's a lot more technical aspects. And of course, it's great that distant digital dance makers never get tired. You can do it 1,000 times, you know, and then you got the live dancers who can't do it 1,000 times, but they're also beautiful, you know, so there's a balance between balancing, making sure everyone's happy, like that's a nice challenge. So the choreographic process was just and challenged, more complex, but more satisfying and more walking into the dark. We just walked into the dark literally and tried to turn on some lights to make it come to life.
So thank you, Pablo. Thank you for presenting this. You said the learning curve was the greatest you had in your choreographic experience. I think learning curve, that's also something Kirsten might relate to. I remember when we talked in the preparation call, in the Zoom call, talking about Doc Digital and how you worked with the motion capturing, you also said, well, we had to do something. The pandemic was there and we just wanted to do something for our dance choreographers, dancers in Doc 11, and you decided to engage in the digital. Maybe you can tell us a bit about this process.
Yes, the fight forward lead us into the digital space, and it was a Sunday, and at television they said we have to close, and I don't know if you know our space, it's huge, and we have costs in the month you cannot imagine, and I was completely shocked. And then the next day, the Monday, I realized I was not alone. My teacher, they made a meeting, and the whole team developed in 2 days an online school. And I asked everybody, do you have any interests in digital things? And yes, and the acrobatic teacher, he works with motion capture, and he's a 3D designer. And so I saw a lot of things I already knew, but it was so interesting to see all the knowledge of the teacher. And I have to correct you a little bit. I try to pay all my teacher, and all the people who work for the school. So we have a funded theater. There, of course, the people get the money, and we have a private thing in our company, and I try to pay everybody for the whole time, full 100%, and we could make it. And so we started to work with the motion capture suits, but it was not in the beginning because it took a lot of time to order them, and then we started to work with it, and it was also such a learning curve, and I have to say something biographic. I'm a typographic, and in the past it was with metal, then with photo, then with programming, and later with computers. So, and in the same time I made my dance education, and in my brain programming and dancing, German expressionism dance. It's a somatic dance practice. It's completely something similar. And with the motion capture suit, so please help me to hold it because I have to move. The motion capture suits are 38 bones, and the bones have an A and a B, and 3 dimensions in movement, and the circulation of 360 degrees. So when you imagine that this information is dance, and not only dance, also Tanya is here, we practice a lot with the motion capture suits. Every person has a original kind of movement, like a fingerprint. So this information and this individual kind of movement, this makes dance as a system and in the same time as something completely individual. And so what you said in the beginning, how can motion capture or this digital thing influence the dance or also for example, the gamer scene? So I think it's a inspiration in all directions, because you can really learn with the motion capture suits the system of movement. You see completely working with weight, working with the quality of movement when you work with particulars. So you can use the motion capture suits also for dance education. And what we do now is to not only make projects, we have also several projects. We are also in a research with system and game designers and movement researchers to find a kind of translation between both universes. And so you see artistic strategies. I think it's also very important to have this politic strategies, because we can influence the game scene, which is huge, with our body knowledge, but also with our knowledge about gender, feminism, all those stuff. And this comes all together with this motion capture work, and when you work with in this field, it's really a universe, and you talk about AI, and now in this moment our system designer get taught by Britt Rodemund in Foresight technology, and we got the permission from Foresight to work with a dance piece catalog, and there's one movement only like this, and this is very as a 2-person dances, and this is very complicated for AI to understand what Britt does, because Britt wanted to have a IA partner, and we say it's not intelligence, it's completely stupid, because the simplest movements it's so complicated to track it. So now I try to build up the universe of what is possible with motion capture, in what direction it can influence. But I think we need also in the next year a lot of research possibilities, laboratories, and to go more deeper into all those issues. I wanted to give you a tiny overview.
Thank you for this. Maybe just another question to you. It's so interesting because in Doc 11 you thought out of you didn't think about presenting in the first, I would say, about presenting the dance in the digital for the first glance, but you thought out of the dancer and the dance teachers, how they would like their movement in space, transferred to the digital, because you, as you said, you used motion capturing, you gave them motion capture suits to really move in that. Now you're working with Brit on a force technology, and you are also going further into that, really giving some kind of vocabulary or repertoire within the digital out of the dance itself. How I mean, you're a lot in contact with this network of dancers and choreographers on that. How do you get response from those dancers and choreographers working with the motion capture suits? Maybe you can just tell a bit how they are working with that, how they feel in the suits. How is it for them to do these movements, which are different from the usual moves they do in just on the stage or just being in a studio, I think.
Yeah, first I have to say we have brilliant content, but we want to present it on our tiny festival during the Art Week. And today, Herwig Scharabon, you can see it on Insta. I think 20 minutes ago you can see Tanya and as her movements in a creature. So there you can see a part. We want to bring all the content we made in 1 week in September. So this is the reason why you didn't see something now. And the second question is with the dancers. Interesting is that a dancer often has 2 different qualities of movement. When they move as a dancer, they move as a dancer. And then when they're ready, they go to the computer and then they laugh because then they move private, and every time they have to, oh my God, it's not me, you know, because, and this is so interesting. And then the second thing is, sorry, I have to move when I explain. Normally you dance normally a lot of dancers feel them as 3D figures, but in motion capture you have also the camera here from upstairs, or you can dance with the camera from down, from back, from sides. So you are a 3-dimensional figure which has complete, and then you can also screech the bones. You can have 3-meter arms and 2-centimeter legs. So and with all those wizards, what you can see now from Herwig Scharabon, she has a stone texture. So you can also make visible the thinking of a dancer. No? So what comes out? Pink, something or something, you know? Dancers or choreographers, they have a lot of imagination during their dance, and also this dancing with particles. A lot of dancers have the really like a 10-meter space of movement, and this you can make visible, for example. So I hope it was not too long.
Thank you for this. Actually, that's a good point to hand over to Einaf Katan also being with us. As you said, bringing the dancers' imagination into the world, also into, you said, into economics is a crucial part. I'd also say, and I think this is something where Einaf might agree, I hope, bringing the dancers' thinking and moving into theory, into the universities is also crucial. To work with dance, to also examine, to research, thinking and cognition is something coming out of your, I think, which is also part of your research for a pretty long time. And I hope I'm saying it right, with your project, with your postdoctoral fellowship also in the game with the Humboldt University, you actually also quite a long time already are engaged in thinking out of the dance practice into the digital. How is it, how do you think, is it that theories of embodiment and also dance theories can re-influence the perception of virtual reality technologies, of technology in a whole? I think that's a big question. Yeah. We can bring it down a bit. Just tell us a bit about your processes, how you approach the idea of coming from your theoretical background, but also your practical background in dance, and bringing this together with VR. Maybe just starting with that point, which is also big, but starting with that.
Yeah, I think that it is a big question because everybody can have their own approach of answering this question. So I cannot answer in general how dance can influence digital technologies and so on, because this is what we are exploring now in different ways. I came from embodiment. I came from dance practice. I was dealing with somatics and the body techniques. I was researching Gaga beforehand. I wrote my book about Gaga. And I research a lot the relationship between sensations and imageries. And part of the arguments that I was interacting with and writing about it, that also in somatic dance and also in dance methods like Gaga, we are not just within sensation, but the work of perception is already an interaction with interpretation and with our imagination. And that when we dance, we are bringing into life imaginary worlds or instructions. Now, each method has different ways of doing that. If I'm taking Foresight's improvisation technologies, so there is a reconstructions of, first of all, of the rules of the ballet, but also of this kind of a space that he's lean upon Laban and this kind of kinesphere and how we folds and unfolds it, all this room writing and all these games within the space. If I'm talking about Gaga, so I'm talking about somatic imageries like once upon a time it was float. I know that nowadays they are not using float anymore, but dealing with textures, but the textures are something that you have to provoke within movement. And this movement is enacted by bringing imagination into life. And on my other hat, I'm also a philosopher. I'm a trained philosopher. My PhD is in philosophy, and what I'm doing is dance philosophy. So also, by researching dance, I was researching a lot also the phenomenological space of bringing movement into life that is not just taking hold into space. I'm not just lifting an object and relating my own position just within my habits and the chair and so on, and taking hold into space. Because when I'm dancing, I'm also creating a way within space that is either already embodied in my technique, or I'm provoking all the time in my imagination, but also if it's embodied in my technique, I'm leading a taste and I'm leading a movement in order to take hold in imaginary space. So that was the first motivation into it. So I think that all these kind of virtual spaces for me made sense immediately, that this is integral part of dancing, moving virtual spaces. And then the question was, what if we are entering into the imagination of the dancer? And by hearing this headset, which wasn't that simple because it's not the imagination of the dancer. It's another space to interact with, but this is how it started.
Maybe you can tell us more about this. You chose to enter the virtual space. You knew on beforehand that it's not the imaginary space of the dancer, of course, but what was it to use this tool for it, and how the tool could approach maybe also this imaginary space, and how could it not?
Yeah. So I will relate the project that I led at Humboldt University, and Nitzan Margaliot was a dancer and researcher in this project, and he's here as part of the participants as well. We led it in between 2017 2018. We performed it also at Doc Elf. And it was out of a research project in interdisciplinary setting. So everybody talked about COVID as a motivator. So our motivator was also institutional, but institutional because we were interacting in the interdisciplinary laboratory. It was an interdisciplinary laboratory of people from 40 different disciplines who had to research new research methods, mixed methods together. And creating methods for interacting in interdisciplinary settings. So that was the setting. But back to the question of entering into the head and so on. So I will relate this project, because this project, we called it Playing with Virtual Realities. First of all, it's about the playing with knowledge. Knowledge is something that we can act with and explore. Knowledge is something to explore and not just going into the highway of the algorithm. And also the aspect of virtual reality is in plural, because there's no only one virtual reality, which is the technology, but also dancing can be a virtual space and virtual reality, but also philosophy as a virtual reality, because any kind of a perspective we train and cultivate in us creates our access into seeing and perceiving the world. So that was the approach. So the metaphor that we used was like the interaction between a technology and virtual visions that they are provoking. So to create this kind of interaction between practices and perspectives, or techne and episteme, like a technique or an epistemology, the way we practice and the way we are integrating in our daily routines of doing thinking is also the way we think. And that's the reason we wanted to reflect it and also to play with it in interdisciplinary setting, instead of saying, oh, you're right and I'm wrong, the other way around usually, I'm right and you're wrong. So instead of entering into disciplinary and methodological fights, which are very, very common in interdisciplinary settings, this kind of having the right or wrong methodology, to start to play and to explore our methodologies.
Thank you for this. Thank you for giving us a short insight, and we are very much looking forward to your let's say, intertwining of theory and practice also during the workshop happening during the next 2 days. You said playing with is probably something that all of us workshop contributors today have in mind when developing the productions for our theaters, for our production houses. Britta, coming to you, thank you for heading over the microphone, coming to Theater Koblenz's production of Verona. I would like to know, you started also, I think it's also some of the first productions you had in the theater going into the virtual, and you decided to do a puppetry theater. I would like to know why. Actually, I would like to know why you started with puppetry and how it felt to come into the virtual out of this idea of puppetry and figure theater. Thank you.
We come actually from 360-degree film as well. We did a cooperation with the museum in that case, and the cooperation with the university as well, and wanted to develop this cooperation further. So we asked the students actually, and the project lead at the university, what interests you in VR regarding the theater? And so the answer was puppets, actually, because there is something that's it has a similarity between puppet theater and, let's call it, gaming like themes. And so that seemed just logical to develop that further. And the university did a lot of the groundwork from the iteration of the puppets. There were a lot of different styles they were talking about, I think, until we came to the actual puppet in its form like it is now. It's actually 3 forms we have in the play. And I think especially for the puppeteers, it was a very special experience. It was a special experience for all of us because it's, of course, completely new to us. And we also had that learning curve. But the puppeteers had very special needs regarding the puppets. The university and we as a theater couldn't think about, actually, because they are trained accordingly. And they had needs like, I don't know, the puppet has to be a little bit, let's call it, heavier, so it can be played good, and it couldn't be too loose. So the arms and the legs have to have a certain physicality to it, so you can play it good. And we have also, the audience is in VR as well in this production, and the audience can play the puppets as well, but they have a little bit different parameters to them, which makes it easier for untrained people to play them, which was also very interesting that the parameters have to change if a non-professional is at play, actually.
That's actually where I wanted to link to. When we had our pre-discussion, you immediately sprang to the point telling us, yeah, and the audience was one of our most important factors when thinking about this production making. And I remember telling us that you also involved in producing the learning curve of the audience into your production. Maybe you can tell us more about this, because that's an interesting point here to hear.
Yeah, that was very important because we had all different kinds of audiences coming to the performance, from pupils up from the 10th class, I think, up to people over 60. And they all have different experiences with VR, or mostly none. So we had to teach them at first what they can do in the VR in order to give them a good experience, which they can learn something as well. So there's a 20-minute introduction beforehand, every performance, where some of us is coming and telling them, so you have to turn around, maybe something is behind you, and basic thing like that, to that button triggers that action, and that button triggers that action. If you want to move, you have to teleport somewhere, because they weren't allowed to stand up to prevent injuries, actually. And they had to stay in their small guardians. Yeah, and we made the experience that we have to teach them a lot, but not too much. If we would teach them everything, so that every single one of these 15 audience members understands completely everything, it would totally get out of hand. But we have to had to find a fine line between teaching them all they have to know, but without needing half an hour for that, because it's just the introduction. The performance is coming still, and that was an interesting process. We had. Thankfully, a lot of test audiences where we could test it beforehand. And I think we found a good balance in the end.
And how did the audience react? I mean, was it like, as you said, most of them had non-experience at all beforehand. They just got into the piece. Did they tell you anything afterwards? Did they give you any reaction saying, yeah, I don't like it at all, don't do it ever again? Or did they say, yes, this is something I also relate to and I would like to watch again?
Mostly it was the latter. We had, at the end of every performance, 10 minutes free play, we call it, a whole new level where everything can be touched and everything can be played. And that was always a good parameter to know what the audience thinks, because it's non-mandatory. They could leave if they want to. But most of the time, almost the complete audience stayed, if not for the whole 10 minutes, maybe for 5. It's a lot of time in VR, which you have to get used to, so that's part of the question as well. But most of it, they were like, yeah, that's cool, and let's do it again. But we had some people, of course, you always have that, we never can please anybody, you know, everybody. So there always were some people like, okay, what's that, and what have I to do with that? We had a screen where everything was shown, which happens in VR for the people who get motion sick or anything like that. So there is a backup. You don't have to be in the VR to experience the performance. It's more fun if you are, but if you don't want to, it's okay. And we had one woman who said, okay, I'm sitting here, I'm watching the screen, it's fine. And she was completely happy with it. So it's really completely different reactions, but most of them were good.
Yeah, I actually assumed that because your position in the theater, being responsible for the digital media, is pretty new, and I think it didn't exist before.
Oh.
I guess so, as in most theaters. That's a big step, I'd say, that theaters try to involve the digital not only maybe for some point and then going away again, but really like having a setup telling, yeah, this is something we want to be part of our theater productions also in the future, not just because it's necessary, as we said, because of the pandemic, but really we see some point of approaching to an audience, but also approaching to the artists within the theater house, and giving there something new. Maybe just as a last question to you, was it a joint decision from the theater, or how did it come that this position was there now?
Yeah,
what is there now?
That's a good question. I think a lot of us have the interest in this new media, and so we're inclined to go there further. And we started working with VR actually before the pandemic, or just at the start of it, so it wasn't really a motivator for us. But with all the streaming and making theater movies, that's something the pandemic brought, of course. But a lot of us discovered over the work with it, the interest. And once you build the foundation, you want to go further and you want to explore it more. And that's what a lot of us do at our theater, and so it was just the next logical step to build this new department, actually.
Thank you. And maybe Marina already knows that I want to approach her. Don't look afraid. Promise, don't be too hard. No, it just, actually that's something where Britta just stopped telling, yeah, this might be the next step. You ended up your presentation with telling about, I'd say, this question of responsibility, of using digital technology within the arts, and also just seeing how technology is also used in the outer world, I'd say, so outside of the arts, and how this is also has to influence each other. Maybe you can, I know you already talked a lot, I know, no, but I think there's much more in that you said, okay, we have this responsibility also out of the arts to know what's happening there, and to also watch it and play with it and be experienced within this digital world, to talk about it. Maybe just to reassume from your talk from beforehand, this is my question to you actually already, which wasn't a question. I'm trying to paraphrase it in a bit. How is that possible, that we as artists, being in the chapel of arts, as you said, how can we do this?
Great question. I think this is one of the major questions that we should really ask ourselves, especially considering the fact that we do move inside a very, very small bubble of artists. And I think one thing to do is to really keep track of the technological developments at the moment, and to, as annoying as they might sometimes seem, to really keep track of the mainstream developments that are happening. I mean, when I watched Zuckerberg's announcement of the metaverse, I didn't know where to start to like run out the room. And what, it's like, this stuff is important. This is happening right now, and there's like billions invested in stuff that is gonna influence anybody out there. And the chance now is, I think, Kirsten, you said that before, like what is our work? How can we look at this from our more artistic perspective that isn't mainstream? So there's a huge shift of how do we call this in English? Sehgewohnheiten. Like the way how we're used to seeing things and our habits, our habits. And we're kind of used, perceptual habits. We're kind of used to breaking up this stuff. I just refer to us as the artist community. This is our jobs to look at things from different perspectives. But the technologies are developing so fast. It's just happening all the time, and all this money being invested, and it's just like, where's the public discussion about this? So, yeah, and it's so urgent, and it's kind of naturally being picked up into the everyday habits of many people dealing with this. So what was your question again? How we can deal with this as artists? Sorry. So yeah,
I got the answer. So
yeah, Can we even? I think that's a really good question. I'm not sure. I think we need to somehow think about how to make our bubble more permeable. I don't know. And that is the toughest question that's been around since forever. And I have no idea. I think we can hope for, instead, and just one side note here, instead of artists being used as inspiration for companies, as in, oh, look how much they invest of all of their lifetime, what is their motivation? I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a lot of studies of, wow, how is it like they work for no money, they invest all of their lifetime, so how can we have our people who are working for us do the same thing? So apart from that, I hope we have something else to share and give. I don't know, but I think it's important to keep track of the mainstream developments that are happening all the time. And like any kind of application, there's a lot of interesting, it's not just terrible, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. How can we actually, something that we've discovered, which we find important, and to add to the ethical discussions around, and especially the regulations that are, those discussions are not really happening. How can we add our little moments of like, we also have something to say, as into like, we also have something to contribute, listen to us, because this is an important point of view that has not yet been considered. I don't know how to make this more audible. That's it.
I think there was some kind of answer. Thank you. So, yeah, thank you. Actually, this is the point where I'd like to open up also to every one of you, but also to the audience. You just get an insight into what's happening during the next 3 days. You see, it's fully packed. There will be a lot of program for all of you also to get into the discussion. But maybe you already have now some questions to our panelists. Leah is here with us, and she can hand over the microphone to you. But as long as you are still thinking about it, you can think a bit longer. Another question to the round, actually. It's also connected to your presentation, actually, because this is something that I hold to one of the points. There were a lot, but this one I hold to. It's this idea of the precarious bodies that you talked about when talking about this reenactment situation that you had with the screaming or screaming woman, where you got into the reenactment situation trying to, or not trying to, be in congruence with her. The question of reenactment is actually something, and all of you coming from dance will agree probably, is something that is going on in the dance field for quite some time. And you're not coming from the dance field. Just to tell everybody who didn't know, but Internil is a performance collective, of course, but working interdisciplinary, I'd say, but not really coming from the dance. Though, this bodily experience that you were talking about, I like to hang up with that. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about it, how you approach this and how you try to conquer, but also be in agreement and non-agreement with this situation of reenacting these women, and how you did this. You just shortly talked about this, that you had this earplug in your ear and this woman screaming in your ear, and just a second later you would scream the same thing. How did you do this actually? I thought about it already last time when we talked about that, but how did you approach this, having all the time the voice before you, like this stretching of time that you're doing in this process of Gog Magog? Maybe you can tell about a bit about this process. Yeah.
So I've been doing it for so long that to me it seems so natural. So it's literally you hear the voice and you kind of switch off the cognizant, the self-reflecting moment, and just blah 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 blah, whatever comes in, blah blah blah, you just follow exactly the same way. And after a moment it kind of turns into this kind, even not meditative, but it's a stream of consciousness that happens. It's you hear something and you don't try to understand, you just follow. And then you do that for a while, and doing this is what we're doing is quite clear, right? To what more or less. And then for me, the interesting part is the becoming aware of this other body slowly coming into one. So at first it's the subconscious, or not unconscious moment of just putting on someone else, like a second skin, but it happens through you, so it's not a skin, it's actually from the inside. And after a while, the becoming aware process, that is what is most interesting to me, because it's those little puzzle pieces of recognizing what one is doing. These are things we usually don't do in life, in everyday life. I hardly ever do that. But during this rehearsing phase, the adopting someone else, there's so much to discover. I wouldn't know where to start. The tone of the voice, the discoveries of being different to that, the discoveries of being different to certain movements. I see a movement, I start to copy, and I'm like, oh, how far am I from this? How many times do I have to repeat it to actually be exactly there? And I have to add, I do come from the classical theater, but I did have a lot of body movement. Like I've been training the viewpoints method for a very long time now. So following a body, kind of, you all know this better than me, coming from dance. When you get into the state of, I like to call it the thinking body. So the mind kind of switches off, the conscious mind, and the body begins to think and follow whatever you're copying.
Yeah, well, it's basically, it's not about dance probably, but I really find this process interesting because we are in two of our plays, we work with text being created real time by a neural network, GPT-2 or GPT-3. And so we have actors, actresses who wear headsets or just headphones, and they get the text read to them by text-to-speech machine. And basically, a little bit of that, what you just described, happens, but it's different, of course, because it's a text that is, well, the text is great, so that's really a comprehensible and working text in a way that they don't know. But it is read to them by a very, unemotional, machine-like voice. But the actors describe the same process, that they suddenly, stop comprehending and just in a way reproducing, but also, of course, interpreting the sense. They give sense to something that is basically senseless. The text is in a way sensible, but by what they are doing, they give it to something. And I find interesting because as far as I understood, you also see the video. So this is your clue how to reproduce movement, right? And you already know the text. Is that correct, or you don't?
I did research the text for a reason. During the research phase, while we surf the web, we do stumble across certain things, and they call their attention for a reason. So yes, there's a certain relationship to the material, as in why, and then usually during it's changed over the years. I find something interesting. I don't necessarily always know why I find this interesting or what triggered me to choose that piece. And then while actually dealing with it on a sensual level, I find this a very sensual process. Actually, sensual, is that? Yeah, right. And during that. During that interaction, something then happens which reveals to me why I chose that, what triggered that. And by the way, copying AI or any kind of machine-generated speech is very difficult. I've tried that for a long time.
Actually, I'm not sure. So what we found, and I can only, because I am only an observer in this situation, I see our actors doing it, and I was very amazed when we started rehearsing for a second piece with different actors, that, basically on day one they were able to do this by, shutting off parts of their brain in a way. So this is what they really tell us. In the end, they try to make sense of what they just said, and this is, of course, is also a very interesting part of this whole thing. So when do you stop the text, for example? So because these neural networks are trained on text that is there, and in this text, of course, everything is there, and so you have all kinds of, if you're not, it happens, racist, sexist, whatever speech is, and so you have to think about what's happening on stage also, because of course this is then, you were talking about the question of reproduction on stage also, but this is of course part of the process in this way, because we make we show by this how this whole stuff works. But well, it's not about dance, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to ask about the process, sorry.
No, that's actually okay. We are also okay talking about performing arts. That's totally okay. No, but maybe just starting with that, because I think there is a question.
I'm just wondering, because I was working with GPT-3, and I'm not sure if you meant to speak like this non-emotional voice, and you meant you have this text and then you say this text, and you, of course, as an actor, actress, you make sense out of it. There I was like wondering what you meant.
Meant by saying how it's difficult?
Yeah.
So to me it is difficult in the process of when I work with material, I always try to understand the logic of this other entity that I'm facing. And I have not yet been able to make sense. I can kind of imitate it, and everyone's going to be able to say that I'm, oh no, now I'm doing this woman again. So I can imitate it for a while, and then it's kind of like, yeah, she's doing that voice again, the machine. But I can't yet, I haven't yet been able to figure out the patterns behind it, the logic. How is that machine now choosing to emphasize on that syllable instead of that? What is the choice behind it? Is there a logic? I think this is what I was referring to.
We intentionally chose the text-to-speech algorithm because we wanted to get rid of emotions that somebody who would just read the text. So we started with somebody reading, a human person reading the text that had just been generated. And then we realized that the actors just reproduce what the reader put into it. So that was interesting. And then if we put this out, if we took the machine, basically, it gave the actors the room to start emotionalizing it in their own way. So basically what they are doing, this is the interpretation that I find. So basically they got freed by the machine because beforehand they just tried to replicate what the humans tried to convey.
Gotcha. This is really fascinating. That's completely something else that was meant, but it's really interesting a step in working with this. Great. I'll try that. It's like this acting technique when you speak in a dialect to get rid of all those inhibitions. Yeah.
There we go. Maybe we start with that point again, trying again to go back to dance, or maybe not just dance, but like all the imaginations that we opened up today with this panel. I would like to hand over to Pablo again, and actually I would like to ask you all the same question, but you can answer them all differently, actually. You all worked in the digital with the performing arts, with dance, with puppetry, with theater, with spoken theater, with performance. You got your experiences, and they were different. In some points they were similar, of course, but I would like to know if you're thinking of doing other productions within the digital, what would be your dream project within that? And this could also be a nightmare, honestly said, so it doesn't have to be a dream, but really saying, where do we see art and the digital could come together? So maybe you have an answer to that.
If a team of us could make something, my dream would be that it's so accessible that anyone could just pick up and do it. As if you'd go to a fountain in a public space and you drink water, you go to a public space in a square and you see some dance, or you can interact with it. So that would be something that's simply not locked away in a theatre or a creative space or a cultural centre, but it's something out there that you can just stumble upon whenever you wanted to. That would be something. Yeah, it just kind of democratizes dance and digital technologies. That would be something, some sort of project like that would get my heart going, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Britta, the same question to you.
Yeah, I think that accessibility is a big point. That's what I think too. Especially to bring new audiences to the theater through the digital art. I think that's something very important now, especially as the classical theater audience gets older and older, to get the young ones, and maybe that through digital art, however.
Thank you. Yeah, Kirsten, what do you think?
Yes, the same idea, and you have to imagine that the next iPhone is AR. There are AR glasses, so you have to imagine this revolution. And then somebody told me, I don't know if it's true, when you blink, you see the digital everything about this person you see because of face capturing. And when you sit in the theater, you can choose out if you want to see the performance without or with AR. So, and the next thing is that a lot of people create now the creature of themselves. You can buy at DressX your clothes, your digital clothes. And next step is that you can buy movements from Tanya for your creature, where you go to the next meeting of your company, and you can make your new dress, digital dress, performance with the movements of Tanya, and it's reality. You can go into in the last winter. H&M, they made cabins where you could make a 3D scan from your body to go shopping digital. So we are there, and so we and our programmers Vaya and Irina, they work now for an app where you can see yourself in the phone making make particles dancing. So and what I wanted to say to you, we have now the AR loop machine, and what you made with your AR, you can put it into a CMS, and then you can be the creator of the dance piece, because you can put the people in time and space into the space. So I think we don't realize that we are now at the point that all those things they are there, but there's no what you said. There's nobody really has a critical view on it, or not only critical, also with some fun.
So I think I'm very much relating to things that were told here. I think that I don't have a specific dream to how to work further with it. I already worked a little bit further with it in other projects, but the vision for me is to engage many people in the experience of unfolding their own habits, unfolding their own traumas, unfolding what hinders them from paying attention to others, and practicing paying attention, and practicing interaction, and also boundaries, and all these kind of things that are basic human communication. So that was interest to me. I think that both dance and VR are tools that can be used for it. Not just how the mass media is using it, but how we are using it. First of all, because in dance we are in contact with ourselves. We are in contact with our emotions and our sensations and our imagination, and we start to be reflective, not just moving within patterns, but why we move and what moves us, and so forth. And VR is also a tool to play with in order to reveal the gap within perspectives, and the fact that I can change perspective or enter into the perspective of another person, listen to them, reenactment, and explore ourselves and also empathy with others.
I'll pick up on the last thought about the gap between one's own perspective, other perspectives. My dream, and this is really a dream I have, and it's probably going to take another while. I would like to see this gap that is there, as well as the overlays, which I've kind of talked about, to stretch that into the furthest possible, as far as I can get, and for this use digital technology. And one approach that I'm looking at right now is haptic technology, as in a constant feedback with sensations that are produced by haptic technology. Just to give you just one comment on this, there are those full body suits. We all know them from this Real Player One fantasy, and I know that this is definitely not sustainable. I know this is terrible to dream of that, but I would really like to be in a suit one day where I have a full body symphony, just not you know, there's this audio concert that you can experience. No one asks you, why do you go to a concert? I literally had someone ask me the other day, what do you want? Why do you want to do that? No one asks why you go to a concert. I would love to have this concert of sensations on a body combined with an experience and a subjectivity that we don't have, that other intelligences have, that for instance, animals have. I would like to see other animals, but humans experience the world. And not just through VR lenses, as in like, look, this is how we humans imagine this animal to tap along the woods, but no, to really, really get into this melting motion of how are they really different? You know, this old ancient fantasy of getting into the head of not just another human, but another being, creature, another intelligence. We're right now creating other intelligences. We are creating something, those self-learning neural networks, it's mind-blowing. They learn on their own. So all this, if we can, like, if that is connectable with a tactile, sustainable, full body suit, that's a dream I have.
Yeah, okay, so I can't top this. Basically, I think, well, I'm doing this now for 5 or 6 years, and there's so much to discover, and it's difficult to say what I would like to do, because it's like every project or every new idea leads to another idea, and then suddenly you go somewhere where you didn't think you were going before. What interests me all the time is basically we have these technologies that we've been talking about are always, in a way, posing the question, what am I doing here, right? So I'm entering this virtual space, and suddenly it's about me, right? And this is different to the normal theater or ballet or whatever experience where you enter a space and you, of course, you do it because you want to enter the space, but you are one part of the audience, and so it's about the artist or about the art or the music or the stage or whatever. So and all we've been doing is more emphasizing this part about what am I doing here. So it's and so how can we use this technology and still make it about the art that has been there? You know, I don't want to reproduce what has been happening on stages, but this is an interesting field for me, because we've realized that just like the last project, we've worked together with a choreographer and with dancers, and they created great sequences and great pieces of art, but because we give the participants power in this space, so they can recreate with the dancers something, suddenly it's so much about what the participants are doing that I do understand the choreographer for being a little bit frustrated about this whole thing, because suddenly they say, okay, I can throw fairy dust in the room. This is what I can do now. And I don't care what the dancer's doing in this moment, because this is something that I couldn't do before, right? But we want to somehow marry, of course, the two. So this is what I mean about this whole thing is so difficult. We have to learn so much for a couple of decades probably to really understand what this whole thing can do. And this is what I'm dreaming of, that we have this tradition, like this is hundreds and thousands of years old, of movement in space, of singing, of, well, declaiming texts on stage, and to put this together in this what is an interactive, participative technology, basically. So how can this be together? And at the moment we are all playing. We try to find out, and this is why we overstep and why we disregard what the traditions are, because it's not important at the moment. But to get there in the end, again, you know, to worship what's been there and to recreate new but real art, and not only, you know, these experiments that we are basically doing at the moment, I think. So, well.
Thank you. I'm happy that I don't have to top this. We have another question out of the audience. I'm happy to hand over the microphone via Leah.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, and it perfectly links to what you said, with all the experience you made, I would like to know if you have the imagination that the digital part in dance or art brings us further away of the mainstream, or actually is capable to build a bridge to mainstream. You were mentioning something, and it was discussed, that we are in a bubble, and there's mainstream, and now meta is coming, and if we don't be very aware of it, we might end up in even a further away bubble. And you said we are playing around at the moment, and technology is by far not as far advanced as we might think. So I'm wondering what you would say based in your experience. Is this a chance to get closer to mainstream, to the others, or are we even more lost?
I want to pick on this. Does it work? Yeah. I want to pick on it just because I had this kind of a wonder, because first of all, I think that there are many mainstreams. There are many bubbles. And second of all, I also think that I'm not disconnected from this bubble, from the mainstream. It's not that I'm disconnected from the world. I think that there's diversity of information going on, and there are motives, of course, that I want to communicate with and motives I don't want to communicate with, but actually I do communicate it because I cannot escape from it, talking about Facebook, Meta, and so on. So in a way, I'm already part of the mainstream and also will never be part of a mainstream because I have my own ways where I don't interact. But I do relate to it because my perspective inside education, because moving people to think in a certain direction, and it's not that I want people to think the way I think, it's the last thing that I actually want, but moving people to see how they can use thinking and how they can be reflective. Sometimes it's really hard work. And also creating solidarity between groups of people that think in different bubbles. And I'm coming from a country where there are so many different bubbles of discourse, and they are not interacting, but putting attention like outside of ideology. It's really a really difficult work. I think that some days I feel motivated, despair, and carpe diem at the same time, like this kind of all at the same time, but at the same time, I cannot give up my own perception on the world. So I picked up on it because it was provoking me in a way, because it's way more complex than artists and mainstreams.
If I may, I think also it took me a while to understand your question. I'm wondering, there are so many differentiations to make, as in, are we looking at the use of the technology, how it is being used, or is it the production of a mainstream kind of product versus a more rather? So I absolutely agree with you. There are so many bubbles. It's so complex, and also to differentiate, is it we're talking about the technology or the product of artistic product in the end, you know? And what I wanted to say, my God, yes. So I wanted to say that I find it amazing how the access to this digital technology to many people is actually democratizing the use of it. I see so many amazing works of art in the so-called mainstream. Like it's amazing what's happening on TikTok, etc. There's so many great little pieces of amazing art which would have never been there if not for digital technologies. So I would like to chime in and say, yeah, it's very complex. So I would also not, yeah.
I just wanted to add that I also see technology as part of culture by now. You know, it's like we cannot differentiate technology nowadays from other cultural products. It's part of our life. It's part of our common imagination. It's part of how we think anyway in society nowadays.
Yes, I had one word in my mind when you said it. One is pop culture. So mainstream is complete. I'm really involved in pop culture, and mainstream is our culture. And then another thing, I forgot the name, who made the Komische Oper. He in a podcast he said the difference between U and I, also Unterhaltungs- und ernste culture, it's a German definition from a very bad time in our history, because they don't want to have the music from the black people in Germany. So, and in a lot of other cultures, we don't have this difference between this state theater and classical and the good thing and the bad thing, you know. It's a really German theme, but I think that you don't mean that. And but I didn't really didn't understand exactly what you mean. And then the third thing I wanted to say is, I wanted to say that the whole time that I think the future is to make a lot of labs. We made such very good experience to make. We want to make every month labs, and we should make all together labs. I want to know from everybody what you want to do, what you want to research, what your interest, and then to bring the people from the game scene, which is a huge scene, together with the people from the pop music, Tanya, with the people from the club, from DJs, from everybody, and in this lab, to bring these people together to learn from each other in a non-hierarchical hierarchy thing. I think this is absolutely the future, because then we involve each other. And the funny thing is that one of our system designers, she has a job in Doc Digital, and the name of the job is Transformation Agent. This is the future.
I have something that I might understood as another layer of the question, because I think that there is maybe a differentiation of motivation between capitalistic, maybe kind of logic, or artistic research that is done not for to capitalize this knowledge, but in order to get more experience and more insight about the world. And in that aspect, I think that per definition is not something that I would like to integrate, but it's not that I'm seeing myself as someone that is outside of the way other people think or interact with, even with capitalism. I'm also part of it. I mean, we are all part of culture.
Okay, I think there's another question in the audience.
I'll try to form it into a question. It's something with the call for criticality, and how you started was, it's something about the call for criticality and how, you, Christine, you started with how dance can influence the digital, which I find meaningful to actually speak about being suspicious and about looking at the problematics of the digital. Actually, because it's being supported, because the digitalizing dance gives it more value than not. And I'm thinking about the idea of NFTs and the idea of dance that interacts with different technologies, VR, AR, AI, metaverse, etc. And as we are going to an era of NFTs and I mean the metaverse, where we're less and less embodied, actually, and I'm just curious about your thoughts. What happens, like, for me, there is value in dance and technology, or digitalization, however you want to phrase it, when dance encourages, or the coming together brings together, one, coming together of people, which I think happened a lot in a beautiful manner during COVID, or we're still during COVID. And second, when we are trying through that attempt to become more and more embodied. And my fear is, both with metaverse and with NFTs, that the value rises when we are becoming less embodied, when we are further from ourselves and closer to a projection, to an image of otherwise, we can call it. You know how, I mean, the biggest, I guess, amount of money right now is in NFTs, because it is something that is not physical. So the non-physical, the non-embodied gets so much value. And I think my suspicion is that dance is going there because, in order to kind of give accessibility to this form that can be actually, I think why it is like lower in the arts is because it has the potential to threat the arts, because it's non-verbal, I mean, because it can look abstract. And when we are using it with technology, we are actually making it more accessible and maybe even less embodied. And I'm kind of curious about that, your thoughts about that.
Maybe I can say something, but I think there will be never a concurrence to a real body in a real room. I think the wish to have this experience is so strong, and especially after this isolation time. It's a very interesting question, because in my whole life I struggle with the capitalism, and we talk about today about I have to play with the capitalism, because I have to have real estate to make the Doc 11, and so I try to play with this like a game. That and because I want to don't get poisoned from the capitalism, because the capitalism destroy our also den Wert unserer Arbeit. Also when I bought the Doc 11, and in this moment I earned a lot of money, 1 million euro or something, but not when we use the Doc 11 as a dance space. But in the capitalistic way, I earned something which is not real, and this destroyed the Wert of the value of our work. So you know, but it makes me crazy, and it's so hard. And I try to play this game and to say no, but not with me. So my children and we all say, okay, we keep dance inside Dock 11 in this little island of Berlin, and then the system of capitalism works as a number, but not real. So digital, we are rich, but in real we have to pay so much money for the place that we never earn money with Dock 11. So you know, and hopefully you can follow me with this abstract thing. I can explain you this later because it takes time. So, but we can, on the other way, we can do the same with NFT. For example, Tanya can sell her amazing movement to people who have designed or bought a very good creature, that they see themselves in their digital scan with Tanya's movement, and she can maybe sell it very expensive to make what she really want to do, the real person in the real space. So what I hope that you can follow me with my bad English, that we maybe play more with this capitalism, which is only making people rich who are rich, and and which destroy the value of our work. So this, I think when we game with this, then we can also work with this NFT. And now I have made a really deep research with NFT, and NFT can be also a very interesting community tool. But this is a too long speech. But that we deal more with all those rules we hate. This is maybe a deal.
I also agree with you, because I think that there is a tension always when we interact with something, because I think that that also with digital technology, and everybody talked about COVID and the logic of foundings and so on, so there's the fear that we will lose our own practices. So I do agree that there's nothing like human experience, like we are a body, we are living in bodies, and we are acting within our bodies. I do agree as well that digital culture made us more and more sitting creatures and less exploring creatures, but it's also about our motivations and how we play with it. Because if you're starting out of the curiosity of how you can interact with movement, and I think that all the projects here are bringing it back to movement, are bringing it back to human interaction. It's not just being in technology, it's not just digitizing us and not just creating data, it's about creating movement and how we interact with imagination, but also with sensations and explorations on a broader sense. So it's always how you approach it.
So maybe just to start, I think this was a big question. Actually, I wanted to come to the big questions today. But as you know, I can't stretch time. And we are already very far ahead in how long we wanted to talk today. However, everyone here in the room is with us together during the next 2.5 days, and we will discuss these questions even further, and I'm looking so much forward to it. So far, I wanted to thank all the contributors on this panel for being with me and also being with us during the next days, and not only talking about what you're doing, but really bringing it into life with the participants here in the room. I also wanted to thank you, all the participants, for being here, being with us during the next days, because I think it will be amazing what's happening in this shared space that we have here together in an analog and also digital way. And I hope it's the same that you will feel during the next days. And last but not least, I have to look on my paper, because of course I also have to thank some other people who made this all happening. It's first of all, of course, the team of the International Theatre Institute, and I don't spare the words of the names. It's Milica standing behind there, it's Lea being with us the whole time in the room, it's Maxime and Michelle, and it's Richard and Elena, all helping us and all being with us during the next days, and also having this and sharing this experience that we will have during these days. And of course, also thanking Dachverband Tanz for funding this experience. We also talked about this a lot during the last 1.5 hours, for funding this experience together with you and having all of us here being together in this room. And of course, being the money from the Federal Commissioner for Arts and Media, which is funding the whole workshop in here. Last but not least, I also want to thank the audience being with us here. I'm looking into the camera, I hope I do. And thank you for listening to the ideas, listening to the dreams, but listening also to the crucial knowledge of all the workshop leads and the participants here in the room that we will share during the next days. You can't be with us during these days. However, we will prepare afterwards a, let's say, some kind of minute document, whatever it will be, so that you can read afterwards on the websites and what we did, what we experienced during these days. So another media again, but still coming back. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for being with us in this room today and for being with us during the next days. And I leave you going to your dinner for tonight. Thank you.